Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. My understanding is that because we're recording this, I'm kind of tethered to this podium because that's where the microphone is. And then I had to make a decision between seeing the screen and seeing the back row. And so I've chosen the screen. So I'll see if your hand raises, but I might not be able to see who's asking the question. But feel free to interrupt at any point and ask questions along the way. That's not going to interrupt me at all. I really appreciate the interaction. So this topic, succession planning, is one that is very near and dear to my heart. I've had experience working with models related to it over a number of years at different companies, and have always found that even when the full model wasn't used, some of the elements in the model have been very successfully used in helping organizations to further their goals toward their capabilities for future opportunities and business growth. So I'm really excited and hope that you'll find some usefulness, and I believe you will, in this process. How many of you have had any experience, by just raise of hand, with either currently or in the past using a succession planning model? Awesome, great. Well, I really look forward to questions from you and clarification or added information from you, as well as questions from people who are just hearing this for the first time. Let's see if I can get this to work well. So we're going to talk about really just kind of 5 general areas today. I'm going to discuss the definition of succession planning, the one that I think is easiest to understand and use. We'll go through some of the information around the individual specifics on how you define the roles in the process and the steps or components of the model. We'll spend a little bit of time on diversity, equity, inclusion, and then some of the things that can derail, which you'll probably get a sense from as we go through the presentation, and that'll probably be a very quick part of the ending of the process. So just looking at the definition, so succession planning is really a process where we're trying to make sure that we look at both identifying and developing internal people or talent based on their ability and their performance and potential to fill key leadership roles in an organization. And the ultimate goal, therefore, is really to kind of build a pool or a capability, availability pool of individuals who have the experience to fill those roles, either now or sometime in the future. And so when you go through the process, you're kind of keeping an eye on a couple of different things, being flexible, but also having a managed process that helps you make sure that you're going to get toward that final goal. There are several things that you might be able to identify that relate to why this is important in an organization. Everybody's very familiar, and I'm not going to read through all of these, but everybody's familiar with the talent shortage and the scarcity of talent, the great resignation. Having a process in place that's having you continually look at what's needed can help you address that ongoing issue that exists in most businesses and across many industries. In addition to that, just being able to have a process that helps to recognize the need to develop people, because this process does that, as well as ways to engage and retain people, sharing and gaining knowledge, institutional knowledge, and having it documented because you know what people are doing. All of those things are great outcomes for this process and reasons why it's important and can be successful if it's used appropriately. So this is the team. There are really 3 groups that have a major role in this process. Of course, organizational leadership, and we'll go through each one of these, or their designees, because it can go down various levels depending on how much you would like to engage the organization. We'll talk about that. Of course, human resources, and then finally the employees themselves. Organizational leaders have a very important role. They must own this process. It has to be really clear to the organization that they are visibly supporting it. The organizational leaders, of course, are key in making sure that there's a tone set that allows the people who are involved with it that understand that this is going to be done fairly and equitably. And equally important, they're the ones who control the resources, right? So both the time that's required, because there is a time commitment for this process, as well as money. And when we get into identifying the individuals who are going to be a part of the process, being willing to spend the money to develop those that you know have the potential to do those next level jobs or those future jobs is really what makes this a process that is going to be impactful. So getting the organizational leaders to get on board is absolutely the first step. The times that I've done this process, when the organization leader really was visibly out there giving opinions, helping to make sure that they're, I'll say corralling their staff and their team, because, individuals have high opinions of some of their folks because they do their bidding, and not necessarily because they're the best person for the future. And having that top leader to help, kind of level the playing field is really important. The next important role, of course, is human resources. While the leaders of the organization own this process, absolutely HR must manage it, and they must be the ones who, in fact, are the ones who drive it. We can be very influential in an organization when we're giving the chance to be the business partner, to be the trusted leader and a thought provider, and kind of the keeping the ear of the top leadership. And in this process, it's really, really critical. Because there are so many different parts. HR has to be the one that kind of makes sure that they get all of that information together. They have a process that's really solid and documented, and they, in fact, keep information because there's some confidential information that will be created and developed. So the human resources role is, of course, very critical. And then the last one is related to employees. The employees in this process, some organizations, when they do succession planning, you have less contact with employees and some more. Everything from, kind of full disclosure and transparency, where they communicate broadly, we're doing this process, and to very selective communication at certain levels. My personal view is it should be done a little bit cautiously at first, because even though there's positive outcomes, it's an emotional process. And people will feel like either they are not getting the focus that they deserve, or they don't want the focus. So you don't want to derail your process by going too broadly too soon. But certainly employees have to be engaged. They have to understand that there's a participatory role that they have in this process. They have to know that there is, in fact, no guarantee, and certainly not a contract, but whatever is done that provides them with feedback and direction, they need to be willing to accept and take action on in order to move forward effectively. So now let's take a look at the model itself. I love models, and 5-step models are kind of my thing. So if you're in other presentations, you're likely to see another 5-step model. 5 is just a good number. 3 is too simple. But this one is really, really pretty clean, I feel. It starts with business need. Then you're looking at specifically, okay, what are the positions that we feel are going to be most important? Then we look at the people, and then we have to finalize a plan and implement it, and then we have to have some kind of a monitoring and/or feedback loop that says, okay, are we hitting the mark? Do we need to make adjustments and do it a little bit differently going forward? But these 5 elements or portions or components of this model are really the only ones that you need to memorize. And I also feel it's good to have a very simple model when you're trying to communicate it to your leadership. It can't be too complicated, because then their eyes will glaze over, but it has to have enough substance that it does feel like it makes sense. And I did want to mention all of these slides are posted through the Whova app, if that's how it's pronounced. So they are available, but if you have any issues, you can also just email me and I'll send it to you. So let's look at the first one, the business need. And I need to have my phone out here just to make sure I'm moving things along. So business need, there's no question that everything we do in our organizations from an HR perspective, in my view, have to be tied to the business need. And if you are really going to be a trusted advisor and get the ear of that top person, they have to know you understand that. So whatever's happening externally, if you're in private sector, there's a lot of competitors and things that are happening that are impacting the business model. If you're public sector, then it's a little less obvious, but it's still impacting. It's occurring either through council or initiatives or various requirements that are coming down through government. But in any case, there are external forces occurring, and there's also internal issues related to operations and making sure that things are running smoothly. And, we've never updated, this application that we've had in place in our systems for 20 years, and so we're still struggling to move that forward. So all of those things need to be understood. And then how does that relate to and ultimately impact the long and short-term strategic objectives? When we're doing the overall model, we want to be able to say, okay, we're going to be able to move the business forward because of this person, because of this initiative, which is related to that external conflict or outside force. So it really should all play together ultimately for success of the business. Also, you probably have seen various models related to the demographics of the U.S. And what's happening in terms of the different groups. And depending on which one you look at, there can be a little bit difference in terms of what years are included and what those totals are. But bottom line is the demographics across the U.S. are having a major impact on business models. And your leadership team, if they're not familiar with this, they need to be, because it impacts the talent, it impacts the culture, it impacts the expectations of the people you're hiring. So spend a little time just making sure that it's clear. And if everybody says, yeah, then you can move on. But don't assume they know. Certainly the baby boomer group is still the largest. Yay! But we're dwindling and certainly moving out of the workforce. But the millennials are having a major impact. And of course, after the millennials is the Gen Z. And so we'll see what happens as that group becomes more significant in the employment space. But this is important for your organizations to understand and its impact. So the next component is related to the positions. I feel in this model you should first start with the skill sets, because you'll see some succession planning models that only talk about the jobs and who's retiring and which one do we need to is already been vacant and but it really should start with the skills, because separate from the job that you hire them for, that business planning piece that you took the time to go through should be identifying what's going to drive your business forward in terms of capabilities, and the capabilities are skill sets. They're not jobs. You can redefine, the job could be, aligned with, finance today and aligned with IT tomorrow. So it's really the skill base that you should be most concerned about. And then once you understand that, and then you start talking about the jobs, you can say, okay, that skill is really critical in this job, and it provides a much stronger basis for your conversations. But ultimately, you do get to the point where you have to list what specific jobs you're going to try to include in this model. And sometimes it's a very unclear piece. Sometimes the skills are really obvious, like pushing a big truck tire down the street. I mean, you got to be able to really have that strength. But asking those questions, saying, now, is this really the critical role that we need to fill? Some organizations only look at the top leadership roles, and I do suggest, I think it's a good idea to only start with a very few positions. So maybe it's the leadership team roles itself and that next level down, whatever that is. And that way you can keep the conversations around who the potential pool is, as well as how broadly you need to communicate about implementing this new concept to a very few people and make sure that it gets embedded and understood, because it takes a little bit of time. Also, if you do that, because you're talking about a smaller pool, the conversations will be it'll be much more likely that the individual will have knowledge of, will either have worked with the people before or they work for them directly. And the further down in the organization, the harder it is to have direct knowledge. You're trying to gather a lot of information, a lot of different places. It's doable, and ultimately it can have a big impact. But starting at the top with the fewer positions I feel, is a really successful process to use. One other thing I wanted to mention is when you're looking at the positions, the vacant positions, of course, indicate an immediate need, and it can sometimes feel a little rushed in trying to make sure you get somebody in place. And so that's when it really requires your guidance in HR to say, we need to treat this as not just getting a person in place or getting a butt in a seat, but really making sure we get the right individual here. Because leaders don't like to have to do 2 and 3 jobs. None of us do. And so having them kind of avoid that potential of hiring too quickly, taking the time to really make sure the skills are correct, is really good. The other thing I'd mention that in terms of the process of defining the job and what you're looking for is to not rely on the job description. So unless you've just written the job description since you had this discussion around, the external market and the long and short-term strategy, then it probably doesn't include all the elements that you're going to need in selecting the right person. So, and in most organizations, job descriptions languish because it's a lot of work to rewrite them. And, people are busy. But so don't rely on the job description. Definitely use the information from the discussions and the documented strategies as your guiding force on what the skills are that are needed. The next area is where all the heavy lifting occurs, which is selecting the right people. Wow, this is fun. I will talk a little bit about diversity, equity, inclusion, but the key elements here are being able to define the performance, the potential, and the interest of the individuals that you select. Because at the end of the day, you're going to need all those 3 things to align like stars in the sky to be able to really be successful. And in some cases, you're going to have to look at some alternative methods for filling the positions. But when we're talking about performance and potential, most organizations have a formalized performance feedback process. It's kind of documented. The challenge again is it may not be aligned with what you've decided are the actual short and long-term strategies. They may not be working in things that are dealing with what are the external forces that are coming against us. So when you're looking at their performance, you're trying to make some assumptions around, they did that project. They could probably do this. So there's a little bit of speculation, guessing, best guessed, hopefully. But it's not all objective. Even the performance data that you have, it's not objective. Somebody made a subjective decision on, they were probably good. And, if they were afraid of losing them, they might have rated them higher than they really are. So I know that never happens, but it's something that you have to really consider in this process. The more challenging one is potential. And we think of potential in a very, kind of nondescript way. I feel like I can do something more. And in most cases, we are all doing jobs that are a little bit below where our ultimate potential is. Hopefully we haven't hit the Peter principle yet where we've gotten our highest level of incompetence. But, so we have some potential left, but it may not be in the areas that are beneficial for where this organization is going. And so talking about potential is really tough, and that's where the calibration with the managers really comes in. And a lot of times you'll be able to sense potential from the way that individuals respond to new initiatives that come up that they've not had to deal with before, right? So they don't have the performance that shows they can do that, but they are motivated to learn about it. and to seek out resources and information from others that have that knowledge. And so they are building their capabilities by being able to use the information that they see around them. And that represents potential. You know, they have the potential to learn new things, to grow, to find resources. So it's not performance because they haven't done it before, but that's where you likely are going to see some of those potential elements. And then that last category of interest is, so in some models and in some processes, the organizations will ask the employees about their interest kind of early in the process. I feel like it should be toward the end. And that's because, you know, if we are really serious about this model and this process, then what we really want to do is try to establish with our discussions and calibrations, this is our best, you know, set of playing. I mean, this is our best hand. And so if that is your best hand, you don't want to already derail it by asking people, and they go, well, I'm not sure. So you want to be able to have confidently identified them, gotten calibration from the leadership team, and go to them with the opportunity that exists, with the engagement and how it's going to benefit you in the long term. And it's a sell job sometimes. Even for people who are being identified, that may not be on their radar. They may have family obligations, or, you know, they're already working 28 hours extra a week, and this new job that you're proposing to them is going to be another 10. So people don't always jump up and say, yes, I'll do that. So I think it's better to do it toward the end, and you definitely need to do the check because, as the slide indicated, they're one of the 3 roles that have to be included in the process, but it's not necessarily a good idea to do it too early. So that's a discussion that your leadership team will have to come to agreement on. So as we delve into the specific areas of defining this thing called potential and performance, there's a couple of tools that are in this slide deck that you might find useful. They're just examples. You can really design anything, but hopefully it'll help you to see what kinds of things you might want to include and then how you kind of summarize that. So the top managers, and again, depending on what jobs you're looking at, you might go below the top echelon to other managers a little lower in the organization, so that's why they're all included here. But you're going to get some kind of a form together that identifies the people and then collects data on them. So it's kind of nominating them because we define these categories of things that they're really good at and this potential that we see. And then the employee fills out this interest form that helps to define maybe information you don't know about them, such as, you know, degrees that they have or certificates that they've completed that they don't have to use in their current job, and so you'd not know unless you asked about it. Some organizations collect that already and keep it in their talent database so that they are able to identify people for projects and things. It's a lot of work to maintain, but again, it provides a great benefit if you're able to go through and do it. So let's look at one example of what this would be once you finalized and really collected everything. So you have a list of jobs or positions, right? And so you've defined, okay, these are the ones we're going to focus on in our first round of doing succession planning. And some of them will have incumbents in them, some of them won't. You may be able to identify that some people have decided that they're retiring soon, and so you can identify that because that's a higher probability and easier to project than someone finding a new job at the company across the street. But if you can define that, that's great. At this point in the process, when you first launch, I do think it's important to do mission critical, quote unquote, jobs. So they might not be all, organization leaders. They may be individual contributors who are in very highly specialized roles. So you can decide that piece. And then there's some codes at the bottom you might want to look at. But there's also a column here around alternative staffing. So it basically means that you don't think you're going to have the people internally necessarily to do it. You may have to look at hiring externally, or it might be because of, DEI goals. Your pool doesn't represent what you feel you need in the future. And so you designate that job because you have done your research in HR and you say, there is a market in the employment pool for this skill set, and we can go externally and probably identify some external candidates who will increase the inclusion of our organization overall. So you can do all of that through this kind of summary form, but you'll be building that throughout the process. Before you get to that, you will be likely doing something like this kind of form. Essentially what you're doing, it says potential, but it could be performance. You can use it kind of interchangeably. But essentially you identify the categories of things that represent the capabilities that are going to be most critical for your business. And then you further break that out into the things that represent that capability. So example, it could be leadership related to the values of the organization. And have the people that are currently there, are they demonstrating those? Whatever you define those are. But this one has 5 different ones. In addition to values, it has the leadership, what it called, interpersonal demonstration of results. And then the last one is orientation for development, or making sure that the people that you're selecting are really focused on developing their people. However you want to define this, and this one was pulled from another resource, but however you want to define this, there are certain things that you absolutely need to have on there, and you'll need to make sure you push for those, and you'll know what's missing once you have those conversations with your upper leadership. But there may be some optional things on there as well that, these would be nice to haves, and maybe you don't put as much importance or place as much importance on that. But that would definitely be up to you. Any questions, by the way? I'm just moving right along, and if there's no hands, I'd love to talk. So, yes?
You may be getting to it, but we've had some struggles with potential because of it seems like it's kind of easy to have a lot of bias in it, from if it's like me, it's good, and if it's not like me, it's not.
Yeah.
Any other tips on that definition of potential?
So I think it's important to, when you're talking about potential, what has that person demonstrated in the past that shows that they've grown into new roles, right? So if all you know is that they've done this job and they did it well, and you look back at their past history and they really haven't been kind of figuring out how to do new and bigger jobs, then it might be a challenge for them to do that going forward. Sometimes potential is easier to demonstrate and to see when people have worked in different industries or businesses, or they haven't just been in the same line or activity. Because again, what you're wanting to know is they have the capability to assess things in a new way, because you define new categories of strategy or new categories of business need that your organization hadn't focused on before. So will these individuals be able to shift with you? So I view potential more related to being able to do things differently and your learning agility than I do around performance, which is you're assigned something, you get it done, and you knock it out of the park when you do it. Thanks. Any other questions? Yes.
When you say assess, like your DEI needs, those are separate from the competencies, right? This is sort of like your diversity of representation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so there isn't a slide related to it assessing that, but in your role or whoever it is that's managing the process, right, driving the process, needs to keep data regarding that. So you knew what your demographics look like in your organization. You know hopefully a little information about the marketplace and what skills and what exists there in terms of finding that skill set among diverse groups. So you're kind of, if it's not internal to your organization, you're kind of playing the role of, well, let's look externally because we need to build this as well. Yes?
So I'm still thinking about what you said about asking interest at the end versus at the beginning.
Yes.
Because we typically would ask some interest at the beginning, so you don't go through the entire process and then come with an offer that the person was like, oh, that's not even in my revenue negotiable. So how do you balance that? Because I also see your point of view. You don't want to necessarily bias the process either.
Yeah.
To assess fairly and objectively, and at the end say, yeah, this is the best person for the job. So I wonder if you can just elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that part of it deals with the leaders knowing their team, right? So if you know, and that might be part of the discussion among the leadership team is, you know, connect with your people, find out what's happening with them, so you're gaining some information regarding their general interest around new opportunities without specifically saying, we're doing this process and you're going to be in it and you're going to find out if we think you have any potential and, you know, congratulations you do, or I'm sorry you don't. But I do agree. It is a little bit of a risk to go through the entire process and the person say, I don't want to promote, I don't want to do that job. But that's the other part of this process is that you don't necessarily identify just one person for each role. So, you know, you identify as many resources as you think could potentially do that job. And, you know, over time, things shift. The business is continuing to grow and shift as well as the individual's interest and, you know, one may leave. So sometimes you only do have one. And, you know, that'd be the case. But the goal would be to have a couple of people in play. You're building the pool of your top talent so that you'll know who those key players are who have potential. And then you find opportunities and you develop them to do the new roles. Yes.
Something that's coming up from experience with our agency is the interpersonal skills. You know, we've had people that executed amazingly, moved up into leadership. Technically, they're great, but they're missing those interpersonal skills to manage. Where does that fit in some of this assessment?
I think you have to fire them. No. It's such a critical skill set. And I say that jokingly, but seriously, I mean, if the person is at a high level and they don't have interpersonal skills, it's really tough to have them pivot and understand the importance of that and to utilize it and to do it every day. But I have definitely, I know of one person that was seriously one person that really struggled with that, and he was a top leader. This was at Hewlett Packard years ago, but he was in I don't know how many programs around it, and he really, you know, drank the Kool-Aid, started to understand the impact of what he had been doing in terms of his relationships and interaction with his teams. Extremely smart, so successful because, you know, he had results like crazy. But he actually made changes, and but it took like a year and a half before you even started to see, okay, I think maybe he's changing. So it's a tough area, but I would just say, you know, you have to be able to have the person acknowledge it, and hopefully you can feel that they're really trying to work on it and get better in it. But it's if that's the category, that's a tough one. Yes.
So if someone's if you're identifying candidates for this program, just because they're high performers in the organization, like they're really great at what they do, doesn't mean they're necessarily potential for this program.
Yes.
As well, and that's the difference you have to kind of determine.
Yes. And I talk about that specifically a little bit later, but they're still in the program, right? So part of this is understanding that the model results in identifying the skill sets of your people relative to your future needs. And one of the things that I use in my process is the final talent grid, which is not in everybody's model, but I think it's important because it addresses the issue that you just raised. So you'll see that in just a second. All right, so this is the summary document. So once you define those categories of leadership that you want to look at, and then those subpoints that help you to define them, then you score the people A, B, C, or however you want to use, and then you put this kind of together, and it gives you an overall sense of how they're tracking toward what you think are the critical skills that are needed for your organization. It doesn't tell you which jobs, but just they seem to be doing well. And some of these categories, in fact, may be more relevant for some jobs versus others. So you may be a B in something that, you know, of course, like in school, having all A's is great, but it might not have as big of impact as another area might. And then this is an example of the form you might use for the employee to have them give you information regarding their skills and abilities that I was talking about earlier. You might not be aware of some of the certificates or degrees they have, or some of the places they've worked that might have information regarding, oh, how did they do X, Y, Z? And you've never taken the chance to get information on that. So it can be useful. This is a 2-page form, actually. So once you have all this together, I did want to spend just a little bit more time on the category of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I know in your roles, if most of you in human resources, you certainly had to kind of address this category. As you know, I've been doing this for 40 years, has evolved, and I've been in HR I was in HR roles for all of that time, with the exception of 2 when I taught high school, which was kind of also an HR role. But I remember distinctly, kind of when this area became more and more present in business discussions, and of course it was diversity. And I swore to my HR leadership that I would never manage diversity activities, because I was just so tired of seeing managers give lip service to it. And when it's an important area for you, I mean, me personally, there's somebody used the term once, kowtow. I don't kowtow to, I don't give people more credit or value than they should get. And I certainly don't, I certainly make my opinions known. So this was just not a good thing for me. And so I didn't do anything in the diversity area until I came to the city of Austin. So, after 30 years, then all of a sudden I was doing diversity stuff, which is fine. But over that time, it's gone from diversity to equity to inclusion. And that's so important because it helps to define why this is valuable to an organization. And when you look at these two things, business case versus what, you want both, right? But it's important that you understand within your organization and your organization leadership where they are. So sometimes they only understand the business case. And that's a good thing, because it does have a bottom line impact. It is, you need to use all the resources that have the skill sets that are going to move your business forward. That includes all the people. But, if you can move people toward the moral, ethical case, then you're more likely to not have to think about why we're doing this. It becomes more of a automatic, just integrated process. And that's ultimately where you want to be. One of the things that I'm going to ask that you consider eliminating from your vocabulary is the term most qualified. I do not use it. When managers use it, it drives me crazy, because qualified is a very objective category. There are minimum qualifications, and everybody who hits that is qualified. So how can you be most? You either are or you aren't. Now there's, a better fit, whatever that means. There are people who have various experiences, but you need to tell me what is that person's skill set and background that gives them the edge. Because a lot of times when people say most qualified, they're looking at years of this or that. Well, this person's done it for 20 years, they've only done it for 5, so clearly they're more qualified. No, the job says you need 3. So I've stopped using it, and I love having the opportunity to ask people to stop using it. But it is really a big deal. It makes a big difference when people stop talking about most qualified and really start talking about what are the skill sets and do the people have them. Yes?
So a lot of times when people talk about DEI and hiring and most qualified or whatever the term is that you use, people tend to bring up reverse racism or somebody getting hired because they have a factor. Can you just speak to us a little bit about that thought process?
Yeah, I think it's the same thing, right? Because when you get away from most qualified, then you're able to include in your discussion everything it is that the organization is looking for in their next hire. And if your strategy and business goals include DEI, then DEI is just as significant a category of hiring as the 3 years of experience that's on the job's description. So the DEI goal becomes one of the things that you're qualifying and you're looking for. And then if you can get people to start talking about, well, what are the other goals we're trying to achieve here? You know, I've been in organizations where the manager just says, we're going to hire a female for the next VP role. And you could just see the look on the face of the rest of the leadership team, you know, because they hadn't bought into either one of these, business or moral case. Did that further the goals? Maybe. But if you can have an honest discussion and say, this is why this is important, and they understand what the goal is, and you're looking at their numbers, it takes a long time. It does. But I really feel like if you have that discussion around what is it that we're trying to do business-wise and from an ethical standpoint, ethics is hard to embed. But the business case ultimately should help people to at least start doing it because it's one of the things that we have as one of our goals. And either we're serious about the goals and you said you were, or you're not. So they're not easy discussions, definitely. You're probably already aware of this, but since you'll have the slide deck, you can use it if you need it. There's of course the visible and the things that you can't really see that are related to diversity, and they all matter. They all make a difference. Some of them are legally covered, some of them are not, but all of them relate to whether or not the person feels like they're being included, which is the last slide. And you know, when we're trying to do this process, we're really trying to make sure that everybody who's in the pool, whether they get selected to move forward based on their potential or not, feel included, that they are a part of, and they have just as much opportunity to get those new roles and those opportunities as anybody else. And unless you get to that point, then you're really probably not going to be successful. You're ultimately trying to make sure that you have an environment where people feel like, you know, this is a great employer. This is employer of choice. I mean, this is someplace that I would want to recommend other people for. And if you can get to that, then everybody who comes through that process, and that's why the leader's role is important in setting the tone for fairness and equity, then everybody will say, yeah, this was a valid process. Somebody was scratching their head. I thought they were raising their hand. Let's talk about this. We're getting toward the end here. I want to save a little time also at the end. So this is what I was talking about before when Jennifer asked her question. This model, it's also called a 9-box. Has anybody seen it before? So this, I find, is one of the most useful tools. It does literally put people in a box, but they don't have to stay there. And it helps to clarify why certain people are either being moved forward or not. So Jennifer's question earlier was around people who are, you know, just outstanding performers, and but you know, you really don't feel like they have potential to move any higher. Again, they've done nothing in terms of learning new tools or resources. They are nailing everything you give to them, and you're so grateful they're there. They are so valued, but they're not the person who's going to lead the organization forward. So that's that top right, top left box. Now, the first time I went through this process, there was a lady who was in this category. I won't say box. Okay, she's in that box. And she was really livid because she really felt like she had a lot of potential, but she really hadn't done anything that said that was the case. And so where we ended up focusing, and one of the things I really reinforced, is there has to be an alignment between this grid and your rewards and recognition program. So that person in that box should know from the things that they're getting that they are valued, that you want to retain them, you need to engage them, and continue to provide them opportunities for doing exciting things, even though you don't see them going from the director role to the VP role. So they're still important, and it's a tough conversation, but that's the only way this works, is that you have to have an alignment between this model and your rewards and the things that you're doing to engage people so that the 5 most important boxes are here are the corners and the middle. So the top right, obviously, those are the people that are performing like crazy. You see all this potential and you can't wait to get that next opportunity to put them into. The people on the far left, I mentioned the bottom left, major problem for you in terms of capabilities. I don't want to use the word dead weight. They probably have skills. Hopefully they have skills. I mean, you hired them for a reason, but they're not in the right job or they no longer are interested in the job that you have. And so you need to have a process for moving them forward, to moving them along, to finding new opportunities for them, giving them performance feedback that lets them know that, this is not the role for you. I don't know, feels like to me from my limited experience in government, that's a really tough process. In private sector, it can happen tomorrow. So, and I'm not suggesting that you just terminate people. I fully believe in and support and believe it's important to have performance discussions and performance feedback that allows people to know exactly how they're performing and make those choices on their own. My best successes, I feel, in my entire HR career, because I did a lot of ER as well as comp and everything else, but was when I had those discussions with a manager and the person made the decision to leave. They either found another job or they retired or, they left. That's such an awesome thing because we were honest with them that they just were not performing. And didn't happen a lot, maybe 3-4 times in a 40-year career, so every 10 years or so. But it's such a great thing that people choose on their own that, this really isn't it. And you don't have to spend the resources and go through FMLA and go through ADA and all those diversion tactics. But this is really important, that bottom left. So and the bottom right as well, you have to be able to have a placeholder. You just hire people. Unfortunately, some managers really want to move too quickly to categorize people and say, oh, this is a star. I mean, they've been here for 6 months, Okay, they found the restroom. Great. But, we really have to kind of pull the reins back sometime on our managers. They're so excited. And hopefully that really is a really strong performer that will over time. But my feeling is, you could leave people in this box for at least a year. At least a year. And then you'll be able to see some consistency, hopefully, regarding what their true skill set and opportunity or potential are. And then the middle one, you've got to have, there's a distribution. That's the bottom line. In any population, there's a distribution from the lowest performers to the highest performers. And the bulk of people are in the middle. And it's the hardest thing in the world for managers to be able to look someone in the eye and say, you're doing a great job. You are performing exactly where I want you to. And they're like, what the heck? I just gave you that report yesterday that you've been wanting. Yeah, and that was on your list to get done. Thank you. But they want to believe that they're, exceptional because they're doing what's required. And it's so tough to tell people they're doing a great job, but they're right in the middle. And so if that person really can be more than that, then it's your job as the manager or working with your managers to give them the feedback that says, and if you want to be higher, this is what you need to do. So give them a roadmap, work with them. And, you'd be surprised. One of the biggest things you cannot do is not evaluate people for things that you give them. That's the biggest mistake. This process will not work on the performance side if you do that. You give them something that's really challenging, they can't do it, and so you give it to somebody else. I realize from a business perspective, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot because they're not getting it done and you're having to spend a lot of time, or the manager is, but you can't evaluate them unless they have it and they are responsible for it. So leave with people the jobs you give them, then you can evaluate them on it, then you can be honest with them, then you can give them performance feedback, then you can develop them or they can make other decisions. But if you keep taking away from people the job you've given them because they're not doing it, you can't evaluate them on it. So this model only works for the performance side if you do that piece. And then the other kind of corner categories are people hopefully moving one direction or the other. But you can put all the people from that previous slide on this grid, and then you'll get a better sense of what your total pool looks like. And then the next thing is related to what happens when you do not have people to do in your pool to do those jobs that you see coming up. And you may have to look at some alternative staffing models. I know a company that helps a little bit with that, but you probably know several. But there are actually a lot of opportunities to use alternative staffing models, either hiring temps or getting some type of job sharing or just doing other things that can help kind of fill the gap for a short period of time. But it's really important to, when you find those gaps, to also, again, review your DEI goals. Because if you're going to have to look externally, then that's a great opportunity to start pushing for some of those things to actually be included in your process as well. Okay, the next step in the process is the monitoring. Yes?
Sorry, on the 9-box, do you share the results with people? I know messaging, you might say, but do you actually tell them where they are in the box?
We did. We did. And because, again, it's transparency and it's a tough conversation, but it's important, I think. And that's another reason you have to be kind of cautious about how far you roll it down and when. But yes, we did. So the implementation plan, some of you may already have processes in place for making sure that information is shared related to the jobs people are doing. The best way, of course, is documenting procedures and processes really clearly for people who come after this person who's been there for a while and kind of knows everything. But when you're in a process like succession planning, it becomes really critical because when people are moving into new roles, they're leaving behind jobs they're probably doing a great job at. So having them document what it is that they feel are the critical elements for that job, either the success in it. Sometimes it's process, document, and steps. Sometimes it's philosophical. I actually wrote up, the strategy, things that we had been doing related to talent acquisition, the strategy for it. And when I was leaving, I thought, oh, I did document this. But you're just doing the job every day. You don't really think about sometimes that there is a structure around what you're trying to achieve. And you get so busy just making sure it's happening that you don't always have it written down. So, but writing down what it is that this team is focused on, or what is it that you would want people to know about this role that's critical, is very important to do and can be definitely integrated into this process. Excuse me, as I mentioned before, the whole development planning aspect of this, when you define those people, some people are ready now, some people it's going to take 1 to 3 years, and that's okay because that keeps them engaged, keeps them, knowing that you feel like they are important, but it also makes sure they get those critical skills that you defined early in the process were needed for your future. So got to have development plans in place and be clear about the timing for that. And then the last thing is related to this engagement or retention plans. Sometimes organizations will create specific monetary, we love yous. Those are always great things. It's happening more in the current environment around employment and lack of scarcity of talent or resources or people for jobs. But I think it's important to have this as an ongoing thing. One of the things I developed years ago was a 3-tier model around performance and reward, if you will. And it was, top tier, these are the things I need to make sure are done in terms of opportunities. It could be, sometimes if you have that kind of a salary increase schedule, it's already defined that they're going to get more increase. Some locations, there's just across the boards. But, you can use that piece, but other kinds of things. You need to make sure that people, based upon how they're performing, feel that they get benefit from that. They certainly will let you know when they don't feel it, so you can take the offensive and make sure that you make it very clear. And these are the things we want to do for each tier of our performance level, top, mid, and lower performers, and make sure that they feel that love. And then the last one was related to, making sure you follow up. It is really difficult to manage this process as a one and done. You've got to decide how frequently and work with the leadership team and get agreement around how frequently they're going to meet and review the information, what's happening with the feedback to the employees, what's happening with the development plan, what's happening with the openings. Are there more openings? Are there less? But there's got to be that kind of a structured process. The first one, when I did this at Manpower Group, the first that process was monthly. So I think the leadership team met twice a month, but once a month we would specifically review the succession plan. And we would talk about the individuals, how they were in their development, what shifts had occurred, whatever they might be, and what do we need to adjust. And then as it rolled out, that process actually rolled all the way down to, if you know the staffing world, down to branch manager level. In the U.S., we had 400 branch managers. So each one of those regional, well, we changed the name of the structure over time, but I think they were region at the time. So each one of the regional managers had to go through this process to define for their branch manager staff how they fit into the 9-box or the talent grid model, what skills were needed, and have all that feedback loop. And we were looking then at the key positions, so key IT positions, and the ones that we're having the biggest issue with making sure we had the right skill sets in place based upon our strategies. But it's a lot of work. But it was so rewarding to see the process going down further, taking a look at what are the skills and then the jobs, and then going through the rest of the process. It all can work. It all can play together. But it does take the focus and the agreement to keep reviewing it ongoing. Probably the largest area of challenge was related to expense, because I guess I've just worked for companies that didn't have a lot of money. Hewlett-Packard had a lot of money, but after that it was not so much. And so managers, they want to do the right thing, but you can't really move the needle by sending somebody to a one-time seminar. So eventually they started investing a lot, and fortunately I was the recipient of some of that, but like full assessment of a third party who, it was so intense of, interviewing all of your peers and the people who worked for you, and the first time I had a meeting like that with someone who was really skilled in giving feedback to executives, I was blown away how accurate it was. Because it's hard to acknowledge, the things that you are not so great at. But they nailed it. And I've been through Myers, I've been through so many assessments over the years. But it was unbelievable how useful it was toward me to identifying the things I needed to do differently toward the skills that were required for the business and ultimately for the organization's capability. So if you have a really, really key position, looking into budgeting for it, it might not be this year, but doing your research and finding those organizations that do that level of skill assessment of top leadership, it is absolutely worth its weight in gold. So I do highly recommend that. In addition to the reviews, I guess the adjustment part is also tough, because once you've defined where people fit in the model, sometimes the managers who are giving that calibration feedback don't want to budge. They can't do that, but the person's done all this work, they've developed, they're really showing that they can do that next level job. So you've got to be willing to move people. And that's the other key part of the communication to your employees, is that it's not a static model. This is not your home. It doesn't have to be your home, I guess. So people can move. And having people move kind of makes that real. So I encourage you as you work through this, keep it flexible, keep having the discussions, be willing to move people, and let people see the benefit of it through the kinds of engagement and rewards you provide in terms of developing them. And I think the last thing I had here was just the derailers. I think we've probably talked about most of these during the process today. The first one's related to the culture. You have to know your culture both for DEI, but for in general. If this is going to work, then you have to know that your leader is one that will be visible, that will say, I own this, and this is important. And if you can't get past that step, you could still push this through, but it's going to be more lip service maybe. It might not be as thorough. So know your culture, and you have to work it through the process. It has to go in. It has to flow in that order, or there's not going to be probably as successful. The support and being visible, as I mentioned, is the key area for the leaders. The selections can't be emotional, and that's really hard. And I say, or non-objective, but it really is subjective and an objective process. But you want to try to make it based upon feedback and information that can be at least verified and confirmed over time. We mentioned the tools and the follow-up meetings. That's really the critical part of it.